Do something, man. People are questioning you.
Shut up. Okay, yep, do that. Sure, guys. Stupid and dumb. Just an idiot. Get your shit together, son. Fuck it. I loved it. Welcome to the DubCast. In today's episode, I will be giving my picks and analysis for UFC 301. As requested by members of the audience, we will give each fight a brief debrief about each of the fighters, and then I will give a gambling angle / advice for what I'm going to do. And if you want to follow my picks, then do it. So let me state again, I'm not a gambling expert. We will get into how UFC 300 went for me, but basically, do not follow my advice unless you want to just tail my picks for some reason. I'm just going to give you kind of a rundown of each of the fights. I'm not asking you to follow my picks, and UFC I'm actually stronger on, but we'll see how this goes, and then I can give you guys a running tally of my picks. And yeah, so okay, first, just wanted to talk about UFC 300, which was a crazy card. Sat in Dave & Buster's for 7 hours and watched the whole fight, or the whole card. Ended up wagering a decent amount of money for my usual units, and only lost about $7. So I had Moicano, I had Yuri, I had Pereira, I had Gaethje, unfortunately. I'm trying to think who else. Figueiredo. I had bunch of stuff that hit and then a bunch of stuff that didn't hit. I was a lot more confident in that card just because every fight I knew somebody in the fight, or knew what their styles were, blah blah blah. I knew a lot about them, so that was easy for me to just place bets and figure out who's going to win and who's not going to win. This card, I literally only know the last two fights of the night, and I don't even know them that well, but I just did some research for the pod for you guys, so we can break this down and get our picks and analysis and get our bets in, win some bets, win some money. Okay, so UFC 301. So something that I noticed right away is that this card is in Brazil, and when the UFC cards are in a certain location, that means that every fight contains when they're from like a place that's outside of the US, usually there's a person on each card who is from that place. So for example, in this card, UFC 301 in Brazil, there's a Brazilian fighter in every fight. So what does that mean? Usually it ends up being that the Brazilian fighters win most of the card, and just looking at this card overall, there's a lot of big favorites, and most of them are Brazilian, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Brazilians take down a lot of the fights here. But that, I don't think that them being Brazilian necessarily means they will automatically win the fight. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. I do note in each of the fights who is Brazilian and who's the non-Brazilian. So here we go. In the early prelims, our first fight is in the flyweight division. We have Alessandro Costa versus Kevin Borjas, and Alessandro Costa is minus 130 on the money line, and Kevin Borjas is plus 110. Oh, these odds, by the way, are as of Thursday, May 2nd at 5 p.m. given to me by ESPN. That's how I look at the odds. I already noticed that the odds are different on my book. They're probably different, but we're just ballparking the odds, and I'm just going to tell you sides. So the odds may not be specific to when you're listening to this podcast. But so in this fight, Alessandro Costa, the minus 130 favorite, he is the Brazilian. So looking at his background, he is 1-2 in the UFC. He actually lost to the person on the main card, Urcheg, and the rest of the names that he's fought in the UFC, I don't know who they are. So he's gotten knocked out, or he's gotten a knockout or gotten knocked out in 3 of his last 5 fights. And so we go to Kevin Borjas. Borjas has not fought in 6 months. He is 0-1 in the UFC. Both of his fights in the UFC and the Dana White Contender Series are decisions. So my analysis for this fight is it's a total crapshoot. I will not be betting on this fight. I think Borjas could be a decent pick if you're trying to chase odds and chase underdogs. I think this fight's probably going to decision. If I had to pick, I would probably pick Borjas, but it's not something I'm betting on at all. So I think this fight's a crapshoot and would stay away. The second fight is in the lightweight division. We have Ismael Bonfim versus Vink Pichel. So Bonfim is minus 550 on the money line, and Pinchel is plus 375. So Bonfim is the Brazilian in this fight. He beat McKinney, who I think is pretty good. He just lost to Benoit Saint-Denis in July of 2023, who is filthy. This is his third fight in the UFC, and he has a 4-pound weight advantage. Pichel, every single one of his fights since 2018 has been a decision. He has a nice mustache, and he has not fought in 2 years. So the only way I can think you can make money on this fight is betting Bonfim by decision, and I'm sure that's not even great value. Unless you want to add a minus 550 odds to your parlay or something, then pick Bonfim. Bonfim's my side here, but his odds are just too stacked that I'm not touching this fight either. But Bonfim would be my pick here. Okay, moving on to fight number 3. We have a flyweight fight between Dione Barbosa. This is a woman's. Dione Barbosa and Ernesta Caracate. Barbosa is a minus 240 favorite on the money line, and Caracate is plus 195 on the money line. So Barbosa is the Brazilian in this fight. This is her first real fight in the UFC. Her nickname is The Witch, which I thought was interesting. And in her one fight in the Dana White Contender Series, she submitted a girl in the first round. And so we have Caracate, who it's also her first fight in the UFC. She has 1 draw, and besides that, she's 5-0, and most of her fights end in decision. So as this is both, my picks here are seeing as though this is both their first fights in the UFC. I'm not sure I have total confidence in either of them. I think this fight goes to the distance so they can feel out the UFC. This is my theory, that when they're new to the UFC, they don't want to be too crazy and trying to get knockouts and submissions and stuff. I think they are more conservative. So I think this fight goes to the distance. That's my play here. I think Caracate is an interesting pick because she hasn't lost yet, but I'm just not confident enough in either of these fighters. We haven't seen them in the UFC to bet on this fight either. So we go to the fourth fight, which is a lightweight bout between Marcio Ruffy and Jamie Mularkey. Marcio Ruffy is minus 210 and Mularkey is plus 175. So Marcio Ruffy, he is the Brazilian in this fight. He has only lost once in his career. This is his first real fight in the UFC, and basically every one of his fights ends in a knockout. Mularkey has a lot more experience in the UFC. He fights people who I don't know. And he has, in his last 5 fights, he has 3 decisions and 2 knockouts. So I think my picks for this fight are Mularkey could be a decent odds chance, but I'm not really sold. I think this fight won't go the distance, and I think Ruffy by KO could be interesting depending on the odds. The sportsbook that I use to bet in my state does not have the fighter by whatever, so I'm not sure on the odds there. So if the odds are decent, I maybe would consider Ruffy by KO, but I just don't know because I don't have those odds. Okay, the fifth fight, we have a lightweight bout between Joaquim Silva and Drakkar Klose. Joaquim Silva is plus 155 in the money line, and Drakkar Klose is minus 185. So Joaquim Silva is the Brazilian in this fight. 4 of his last fights have ended in knockout one way or the other. He lost to Sarukian, who I think was the fighter who beat Charles Oliveira at 300, so that's a good loss. He's lost 3 out of his last 5, and he has a lot of UFC experience. And we go to Drakkar Klose. 3 of his last 5 fights are knockouts. He only has 2 losses, and he is on a 3-fight win streak. So I think in this fight, I like Klose here at decent enough odds. I think he could be a decent parlay or round robin booster to add at only minus 185. I think those are good odds for him. And if we're picking if the fight goes the distance, I don't think it goes the distance, and I think there will be a knockout, probably by Drakkar Klose. Okay, so that rounds out the early prelims. Now we head to the regular prelims. We have the sixth fight, which is a featherweight bout between Gene Silva and William Gomis. Gene Silva is minus 120 on the money line, and Gomis is plus 100. Gene Silva is the Brazilian in this fight. So this is his second real fight in the UFC. He's on a 5-win streak or more, I think. Only one decision within those last 5 fights and only 2 losses. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Messed up my notes here. We go to Gomis. He is from France. He has a 5-inch height advantage on this. He's also has a 5-win streak. He has more UFC experience than Silva, and 3 out of his last 5 fights were knockouts. So my picks for this fight are, I think the fight ends early, but I'm not sure how early. I think one of them has a lot of knockouts in the second or third round. I can see why this is a pick'em. I would lean Gomis in this, do the odds. He's or being plus 100. I love the plus sign to chase odds in the UFC. That's sometimes the only value you're really going to get. But I'm not fully confident in Gomis. But that's my side there. Moving on to the 7th fight, we have a lightweight bout between Elvis Breener and Mikey Tibek or Oral By. So Elvis Breener is plus 205 on the money line, and Oral By is minus 250. So with Breener, he is the Brazilian in this fight. He's on a 5-fight win streak, probably more, including 3 of those being in the UFC. His wins in the UFC are split decision, then knockout, then knockout. He only has 3 losses in his career, and before the UFC, he was a submission guy. So we go to Orlabi, who is on a 5+ fight win streak. He has only lost once in his career, and 3 out of his last fights are knockouts. So my picks for this, I don't think this goes the distance. I'm taking the under in the rounds. I think there's merit betting Breener if you're chasing odds, but I'm just not confident enough myself to do it. And if you're looking for a big underdog plus 205, I think this could be the spot where you could say, let's do it. So that's my advice there. Moving on to the 8th fight. It is another women's fight in the strawweight division. We have Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Yasmin Lucindo. Kowalkiewicz is plus 300 and Lucindo is minus 400. So with Kowalkiewicz, she has a 4-fight win streak in the UFC. She's 38 years old. She has 1 submission, but the rest are decisions. Lucindo is the Brazilian on this card. She is 2-1 in the UFC. She has 2 in the UFC. She has 2 decision fights and 1 submission, and she's 22. So we have a 22-year-old versus a 38-year-old. I think this is another one that goes the distance. And if you're feeling frisky, you can pick Lucindo by knockout or submission. I just don't love the odds here. Besides going the distance, so I'm staying away from this fight. Fight 9, we have featherweight bout between Jack Shore and Joe Anderson Brito. Jack Shore is plus 140 and Joe Anderson Brito is minus 170. So with Jack Shore, his nickname is Tank, which I thought that was cool. He's won 4 of his last 5 fights, all in the UFC. His last 2 fights, he got submitted and then submitted somebody. He hasn't fought in over a year, and he only has 1 loss on his career. Brito is the Brazilian in the fight. He's on a 4-fight win streak. Within that streak, he has 2 submissions and 2 knockouts, and he has 3 losses in his career. So I think this is going to be a really good fight. I could see this ending in a submission potentially. I'm in Shore's corner a little more than other underdogs, but we'll see what the rest of the card brings. I wrote that down before I looked at the last 7 fights. So we'll see if I end up adding that to my card later. So those are my picks and analysis for that fight. Leading us to the main card, we have the first fight here is a light heavyweight bout between Paul Craig and Cao Borralho. Paul Craig is plus 450 and Borralho is minus 725. So with Paul Craig, he has a 5-inch height advantage. He beat Muniz and Krylov, who I think are decent, and he is 36 years old. Borralho is on a 5+ fight win streak. He's only lost once in his career, and all of his last 5 fights are decisions besides 1. I think Borralho is going to smoke him. I would take Barajo by decision if the odds are decent there, or add it to a parlay or something. Moving on to the next fight on the main card, we have a middleweight bout between Michael Pereira, who is minus 650, and Ihor Potieria, who is plus 425. Michael Pereira is the Brazilian. He has 5+ fights, or one in a row. He kind of fights scrubs. I didn't really know any of the people he was fighting. His last 2 fights are a submission win and a knockout win. And then with Potieria, he fought recently, only 3 months ago, in February of 2024. He's 2 inches taller, but in 3 of his last 5 fights, he was knocked out. So my picks here, I think this probably ends early in a Pereira knockout. I don't see Potieria winning this fight. I just don't see good odds overall, so I'm staying away from this one. So the next fight, which is the last fight that I just didn't know anything about before doing research, we have Anthony Smith and Vitor Petrino in a light heavyweight bout. Anthony Smith is plus 425 on the money line, and Vitor Petrino is minus 650. So Anthony Smith, within his last 5 fights, he is 2-3. He beat Span twice, who I think is decent, so those are decent wins. When he's lost 2 of the times, they've been knockouts. He faces a lot of studs, which may be why he's losing so much, and he has 45 total fights in his career. He's a guy who's been there in the UFC, done a lot. And then we go to Petrino, who is 11-0, including 4 fights in the UFC. He hasn't really fought anyone crazy, but in his last 5 fights, he's done it in a variety of ways. He's won 2 by decision, 1 by a submission, and 2 via knockout. So my picks here, I think Smith is just too old, and he's kind of a punching bag in the UFC at this point. I think Petrino beats him, but I'm not sure how he actually does it, since there's a lot of variety in the ways he wins fights. So getting to the last 2 fights, these are the fights that everyone's looking forward to on this card. We have a bantamweight fight between Jonathan Martinez and Jose Aldo. Martinez is a minus 150 on the money line, and Jose Aldo is plus 125. So with Jonathan Martinez, he is on a 5+ fight win streak, including wins over Nurmagomedov and Cub Swanson, who I know. And within those 5 fights, 3 of them were by decision and 2 were by knockout. He is an inch shorter, and when the fight ends in knockout, he is 9-1. And with Aldo, he is the Brazilian returning home here. He has not fought since August of 2022, and he is 3-2 in his last 5 fights, beating Rob Font, Munhoz, and Chito Vera. And his 2 losses are to Mirab and Peter Yan. So my picks here, my heart is saying to pick Jose Aldo, just because he's coming home and he's returning to the UFC here, but my head is saying Martinez. I just think Martinez is too good to lose to an aging Aldo, despite the crowd potentially going nuts for Jose Aldo. I do think this fight will go the distance, though. So those are my picks for Martinez versus Aldo. And then the last fight of the night, the championship fight, is a flyweight bout between Alexander Pantoja versus Steve Urcheg. So with Pantoja, he is the current champ. He is the Brazilian in this fight. He has 5+ wins in a row, including wins over Royval and Moreno to defend the belt. 3 out of his last 5 wins are decisions. He is 3 inches shorter than Urcheg, and he has never been knocked out or submitted. With Urcheg, he has 5+ wins in a row as well. This is only his 4th fight in the UFC, and he's already going for a title belt. He hasn't beat anyone, but I think this is his time. His nickname is Astro Boy, and he only has 1 loss in his career. So my picks here, I'm all in on Urcheg. This is my major bet here, but I'd be shocked if Urcheg wins by any way other than decision. So my picks there is Urcheg by decision. Okay, so now we will go into my official betting card and see. These are the picks I'm totally confident in. And then we will go into things that I will possibly take. So my actual betting card. First one is Urcheg. If I'm able to get to a different state before Saturday, I will also take Urcheg by decision. That's the first one on the card. I'm giving you guys 4 picks here on my betting card. Second, we have Jonathan Martinez, minus 150 by decision if I go to another state. If not, just take the money line, minus 150. And then I have Jack Shore money line plus 140 and Drakkar Close money line minus 185. So those are my 4 picks for UFC 301 locked in things that I will bet on. And then the other things I will possibly bet on are Barajo by decision, Kowalkiewicz and Lucindo to go to to go the distance, and Barbosa and Karakati to go the distance, just because women fights tend to go the distance usually. And then possible odds chase. If I'm feeling frisky, I'll throw some money on Breener and some money on Gomez. So that's going to wrap up my UFC 301 picks and analysis with my gambling advice here. Let me know what you guys think. Should I change the way I did this? Did you like it? If I should keep doing this, let me know in the comments below. And yeah, more content's coming. Next pod will be a movie review, most likely. So either Looper or All the President's Men. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you. Enjoy the fights. Bet responsibly. Again, I'm not an expert, so if you don't want to follow my advice, you don't have to, and you shouldn't probably. Okay, have a good one.